Hey folks, welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you being here. When I'm recording this, it's been a couple of weeks since I got back from Newfoundland, Canada, specifically St. John's, with my fiance. We went to attend the wedding of some very good friends of ours, Lucille and Evan. So congratulations, guys. I had a great time getting to see you over the weekend and experience Evan's your home province in Canada. It was really quite nice, and I enjoyed being up there very much. It was kind of a very different vibe and feel from being in America, which I appreciate and love, especially in the world that I'm living in right now. Today's episode's a really interesting kind of throwback. My guest on the show today is a gentleman by the name of Derik Boik. I met Derik years ago, starting in comedy in New York City, and he, I believe he used to produce a show called The World's Tiniest Stand-Up Show. It was in the East Village, I believe, and he's going to correct me on the details. He's on his way over now. And he's a guy that I was very close with and familiar with kind of his life while we were in the comedy scene, when he was in the comedy scene, particularly. His life's kind of taken a different direction, and I know that because I've interestingly get notifications on his career on LinkedIn. So I know that he had been producing reality TV the past couple of years, and he's a guy that, again, I hadn't seen in very while. And the theme on this podcast, as I'm sure you might know, is me talking to people I haven't seen recently. And I wanted to see where he's at, kind of talk about some things, and get to catch up with him again. So I'm curious to see how this conversation goes. He told me initially when I asked him, well, do you primarily interview stand-ups? Because I'm not really, I don't really do stand-up anymore. And I responded back saying, I interview whoever I want. So he's going to be here shortly, and I'll share that conversation with you. And I appreciate you guys being here. If you want to support the show, a good way to do that is to go and leave a review on iTunes, or you can add us to your faves playlist on Stitcher. These are all things that kind of help grow the show, help other people find it. And if you have friends who you think might enjoy listening to me interview people that I know or am fans of, because that's what I tried to do here. I don't tend to... If someone's on the show, it's because I want to talk to them. If you know someone who might enjoy that, let them know. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want bonus stuff related to a lot of the stuff I talk to on the show, be it food, music, or travel, you can give my Patreon a look at patreon.com/awesomedisaster and see what kind of stuff, if anything, over there tickles your fancy. I think that's still a phrase that people use. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm just becoming a slowly antiquated part of modern society in the way that my age group is going to. But either way, I'm glad that you guys are here. And let's talk to Derik Boik. Be recording soon, and now we are. How are you, man?
I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I'm doing good. I haven't seen you in I feel like 6 years.
Has to be at least 6 years.
Yeah, easily like that. I just had Jason Salmon on. You remember him?
Oh yeah.
He's another guy from when I first started doing comedy in New York that I hadn't seen in a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have moved to LA.
Yeah, lots of people move through to LA. Have quit, or there's this kind of interesting thing I'm noticing. We were all kind of in the trenches, as people would say, I think, and then we're all just kind of splintering off and finding our own things and our projects that we're working on.
I'm realizing I'm nodding, and I'm like, yeah, nodding is good for podcasts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, because I have two very specific memories I have of you.
Okay, go for it.
From doing comedy. So I remember a picture of you crying, wearing a silver suit in a bathtub. I remember you posting that and thinking that should be your album cover.
Brown suit, but yeah.
Brown suit. Okay.
Yep.
And then the other one I remember is I think you used to produce a show in essentially like in a dumpling restaurant in the East Village.
Yeah, it was a bar next to a
Bar.
dumpling restaurant.
Bar next to a dumpling restaurant. Okay.
What was that? The place was called Happy Time,
Yeah, that sounds about
right?
That
and
that
and
sounds
the show
familiar.
was the world's tiniest stand-up show.
Yes.
Because and I could fit. I think the most we fit was almost 80 people, but
Yeah.
that should have been a fire hazard.
Yeah. Oh no, I remember that place. That was the center of a couple of other things. I seem to remember Michael Che being on that show once, or
Yeah, I think he might have been on the first.
yeah. So it was Michael Che. I think Jared Logan might have been on one.
Definitely. Yep.
Who else might have been on
Mike
that?
Lawrence was on it.
Yep.
Oh man, Adriana. What's her last name? Lapucci.
I know who you're talking about.
I
I
just-
don't know how to pronounce her last name either. I just know she's
Um,
fucking hilarious.
Yeah, I had a bunch of people on, man. Mark Norman, I think.
Yep.
I mean,
Joe List, did he ever do it?
you know what? I think he did.
Uh-huh.
I think I had Sean Donnelly.
Yeah, Sean.
I'm trying to think.
Just like literally.
I'd have to look at the old posters.
Literally, just like everybody that is like. So many people that are like, established comics or like in the comedy scene now were at that show, and I find that pretty
I definitely
remarkable.
had a bunch, they had been on TV and then they did my tiny little place for free.
Yeah, which is what I love about New York is that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we were producing shows in like rural Oklahoma, that would require some money to be able to
sure.
bring in those names. I also remember I was just thinking about this now when we were talking. Do you remember there was a drunk woman who like heckled an entire open mic at the Pit, and then somebody filmed her going on stage and everyone yelling at her. And
yep.
Because she was just blasted.
she was a student there. She was a comedian.
Yeah. And she had signed up to do open mic, and she was just drunk and heckling everybody.
Emily something.
Yeah, I don't remember her name.
And then I had her come on and do an apology.
Yeah, you were like
at
the
Happy Time.
You were like
I
the
don't know why
bookend
I
of
did
that.
if that was just a pure stunt.
Well, that was like because I remember those couple of days. It got really strange really fast because that video got a lot of views.
Yeah, like death threats. I mean,
It got-
it got really dumb.
It got stupid very fast. I was the closest I've ever felt to like really something really stupid.
Oh, I
Like,
just remember.
when
I
it
remember
comes to
watching the
comedy.
video and thinking like, "Oh, she shouldn't have done that. She's stupid." But that's as far as my like negativity goes. And then reading the comments, they're like, "She should die and she should choke on a," like.
Of course,
It's just
I was at that open mic. I was sitting off to the side, and as soon as I knew she was going up, I was like, "Oh,
This isn't going to be good.
oh God!" And then I saw that someone had filmed it. I was like, "Oh, this is the whole thing." I wonder. I hope she's doing all right. She probably
She's
is.
probably. I mean, I'm probably still Facebook friends with her.
Right.
I feel like that's how I know kind of what everyone's doing a little bit is Facebook, but I'm on it a lot less now, obviously.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. Do you still do the Facebook?
To promote, I have it to promote stuff, but I don't try. I try not to spend a ton of time
Yeah.
because it's infecting my brain. I think and
I've stopped
affecting
Facebook
me
and
negatively.
talking to my mom since Trump.
Oh yeah. well, I talk to the only people I've ever had to block are family members. I
Yeah,
haven't had to
me
block
too.
strangers yet, but Christmases are okay. But my dad has never told me who he's voted for in his entire life.
That's probably smart.
He keeps it very surface level. He's like low key. I think he's like low key prepper. He retired a few years ago. And last time I was there, he showed me this giant battery that he can run his entire house on.
Okay.
So that's kind of where he's.
You mean
at.
like a generator?
No. Like it sort of looks like an external hard drive.
Okay.
And he has it like his house on a timer. So when it gets to a certain temperature, the battery kicks in, and then now he's just trying to find like the biggest battery that he can use to run his house.
So he could be completely off the grid? Is that what
Yeah, I
he's
think
trying to be?
I think so. He's trying. I think
He
he's
just
trying to
wants
go up. He's trying to be off the grid as much as possible, but he's still like a 20-minute drive from a Wawa. So he can only. It's
So
sort of
this
like
is I just heard of Wawa. This is in Jersey then?
Maryland.
Maryland. Okay.
Wawa just came to Maryland.
So my wife and I just this last weekend put an offer on a house. So we're in the very beginning of buying a house.
Oh, congratulations.
So, and now I know about Wawa because of Jersey, and I know about pork rolls apparently.
Yeah. Is that where you're moving?
Jersey, yeah.
Yeah. You don't live there now though?
No, Queens.
Queens.
Yeah.
Are you still in the? Because we used to live like I think across the
Woodside.
street from each other. Yeah. Because I would see you on the 7 a lot with your daughter when I was heading to work.
Yep.
Those are the days, man. but I one of the themes on this that I realize a lot is like I feel like I know a lot of people, but I don't really know a lot of people.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. Like I feel like you feel like you know comics a lot pretty close because you see like their act and you see their like most innermost things, but I don't really know much about you. Like where
So
do
you think I'm a pretty depressed person? That's what my bit was that I was doing.
Yeah, well, I just remember because you also did like some storytelling stuff, and I always remember like I always thought of you as like the handsome guy.
Wow, thank you very much.
But like where did you grow up?
I grew up in Florida.
In Florida.
Yeah, I was born in Tennessee. Never lived there. My mom had me sort of out of wedlock, as they say. But she had me in Tennessee, and then I grew up in Florida. She lived in Florida.
What part of Florida?
Castleberry, so Central Florida.
Central Florida.
Yep.
Okay, so not near the water.
Not near the water at all. No, I grew up outside of Orlando.
Okay.
I grew up when I can remember. We moved to Longwood, I think, when I was 4. So it's a tiny suburb of outside of Orlando. Yeah, and that's where and now my mom. I never met my biological father at that point.
Oh, really?
But then, and she married David Boik. She met him when she was pregnant with me, so I've always known him as my dad.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And did you ever meet your biological father?
Actually, yeah. I met him for the first time like 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And was that heavy?
You know, it wasn't as heavy as I thought it was going to be. I knew exactly how heavy it was going to be. I used to joke that I'm just going to have one more Facebook friend that I ignore, and I don't want to say that because I'm sure he'll listen if I post this on. But like, he would even acknowledge that like it didn't turn into like now we play catch in the front yard.
Sure.
But I met him. He's a great guy, and I'm glad to have met him. And we had a beer and a laugh. We told our stories, and honestly, I almost feel like I met him for his sake, if that makes any sense. I think
so.
He kind of had this. I think he was pretty like choked up at the idea of me hating him or having bitterness towards this man that I never met, and I was like, oh, that's
right.
That couldn't be further from the truth. Like I never really thought about it. I had a great life. I had a dad growing up, and I don't know, I could actually see the relief like come off of him, and we just like I said, shared a beer and a laugh and went on our separate ways, and now we're Facebook friends.
Nice, because there's always this like the way that's always portrayed is like there's this kind of like heavy this like heaviness of like, oh, who am I really?
Yeah.
Like that's how like that situation gets portrayed in TV all the time, but you never felt like you were missing something because you didn't know who he was.
No, I definitely did growing up say a couple of times like, you're not my real dad, and obviously looking back I'm like, that was such a dick thing to do. But no, I never really felt like anything was missing until someone was like, what do you think you have like brothers or sisters? And it was like, oh, what? I had never ever thought of that.
Sure.
And so around college, I did try to look for him. I don't want to say his name, but I was looking up his name, realized I didn't know how to spell his last name. There's like 3 or 4 different spellings of his name. And I called every single one of them in the phone book, and there was probably like 25 names. And there was even one guy that I was talking to that I was like, I think you might be my dad. Did you grow up outside of Orlando, or that kind of thing? And this guy was like, who is this? Who sent you? Who told you to call me? And all this stuff. I'm like, hey, no, this isn't like a prank or whatever. Like, and he was like, how old are you? And at the time I was like 23. He's like, dude, I'm only 22 years old. How the fuck could I be your dad? And I'm like, oh, sorry. Well, you didn't start with that,
right?
Like I didn't know.
Well, if his voice sounds like that, in Florida, that could be like that could be an older guy. That sounds like an older guy's voice.
Exactly.
The fact that he's 23 is like says a lot about his life choices.
I had no idea who this guy was, so I was like, sorry, well, I'm gonna get off the phone now. Sorry for ruining your day.
Right.
You know? So I didn't find my dad that day, but I definitely scared at least 25 people.
There's a lot of people that are like, I'm going back to church now.
Yeah, definitely. I even talked to, not to get too far in the weeds, I talked to a woman who by the end of the conversation actually hoped I was her husband's son. We had a great conversation, and I was like, do you think that he I know he lived outside of Orlando, and she was like, yeah, oh my God, you might be, like, oh my God, you just might be. And I was like, did he ever work in medical sales? And she was like, oh, no, never worked in medical sales, and was like bummed about it. And I was like, do you think he ever would have told a woman that he worked in medical sales? And she all of a sudden was like, maybe, oh my God, maybe he did. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
But then long
man.
story short, he came home during the conversation and was like, no. So she was like, oh, well.
That's crazy, man. I did not know that. That's gnarly.
Yeah. No.
So Central Florida. And what did your dad that you knew, Mr. Boik? What did he do? What did your mom do?
He worked at AT&T. He's a computer guy.
Ah, cool.
And then my mom, she was in education.
Oh, yeah. Oh, really? Was she a teacher?
She was never really a teacher. She got her master's degree in elementary education and then ended up taking, instead of working at a school, she ended up homeschooling my brother.
Yeah.
My brother just needed some extra schooling attention. And I don't want to get too far into that.
Oh, no.
But yeah, no.
You don't have to say anything you don't want to say.
She ended up just staying at home and teaching him. And then my parents actually, my dad retired early. So they have been living sort of, they sold their house, the house that I grew up in, and they owned a small condo in Daytona. And they spend most of the year like living all around the world. So it's kind of a
really?
weird, yeah, it makes you mad.
They're literally doing the things like, all right, we're retired, let's go see the world.
They're living the cheapest that they can possibly live, so that they can spend most of their time like in Italy, Greece.
They could get a tiny house. They could get like
where they live is almost a tiny house.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a 2-bedroom condo, but it's pretty small.
Oh, wow. That seems so like. I was thinking this was like a typical like retiree in Florida kind of narrative, and then you said travel around the world. I was like, that doesn't fit.
No, they're young. My dad, I want to say he just I don't want to mess this up. He just turned. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's all good.
I really feel like I don't know anything about my parents or my grandparents. Like
I feel
he's
the
60 something, but early 60s, and
yeah, that's about how old my dad is. My dad, there's was some distance for a really long time. I'm trying to get it back together. It's difficult.
With your dad, like trying to
rekindle with my dad. With my dad, because
do you call it rekindle when it's that seems like romantic?
It does.
You're trying to rekindle the romance.
I will say I'm trying to like, I guess, push it back together, but sometimes it's like trying to put two north sides of the magnet.
Yeah.
But
that's how it is with my mom. Honestly, right when the elections were happening, back when I knew Hillary was going to win. Yeah. And she was posting the dumbest things on Facebook, and so was my aunt and other family members. We just had this like big falling out. And not even I could respect her being Republican, but I can't respect being completely ignorant and like the stuff that she posts just factually being wrong, lies.
Yeah, that's kind of that's what gets me. That's what gets me too. Like I'm not like most of my more progressive friends that seem to totally think that if you voted for Trump, you're essentially a Nazi. I'm not like that.
Sure.
Nor do I think everyone who voted for Trump is this like vile, hateful person, because I know that's not the case statistically, but it's just that's really mean people.
I love having a debate with people who think differently than me, but as long as we are debating facts.
Yeah, and that is hard to find with this particular president. I've found that's why like the one family member I had to block. I had posted something about, it was like the day Tom Petty died, and he got on me for not posting anything about the Vegas shooting, and then I went to his Facebook profile, and all it is just is just articles and rants about people kneeling during the national anthem for NFL games. So I just screen capped that and was like, oh, next time I'll post something like this, and then all my friends just jumped on him. It's I don't regret a second of it. But of blocking him, he's not coming to the wedding.
When is the wedding, by the way?
Next May.
Next May.
Yeah.
Cool.
Which is exciting. Got a lot of, it's just, oh my God, there's just trying to plan as much as possible now, so that there's like less things to pull our hair out in April.
Right.
Is where
are you going to do it?
In Brooklyn.
Okay.
She's from Brooklyn, so I feel like I wanted to be like a big city person my entire life because I'm from the boonies, and I wanted to not be that. Just really wanted to not be that, and not like I wanted to like sip wine with like intellectuals, but I just did not want to be a rural country boy for the rest of my life. I don't know if you
where are the boonies?
About Calvert County in Maryland. It's about an hour south of DC. It's let me think of the best way to describe it. It is the kind of place that like all the pop punk bands that kids formed in high school, they would sing about getting out of. And like it's I think it's mostly thought of as a suburb of DC for like people who work in DC, like lobbyists and stuff.
Sure.
Or like a place if you're just like ready to chill out. I mean, not a bad place to grow up by any means, but it's just not where I want to live.
Sure.
Now.
No, well, that's why I don't understand or have any empathy or sympathy for people who are just willfully ignorant. Is that I grew up in Florida.
Right.
I was born in Tennessee. I grew up around people who, are, bigots, and they hate gays, and they're squeamish around black people and whatever. And I always knew it was wrong. I lived there. I grew up innately just next to them. Sure. I could have been them, but I wasn't. I just knew it was wrong. I read books. I watched movies. I got outside of, whatever my comfort zone was, and I just always inherently knew it was wrong.
And is that something? Is there a moment that you remember when you were like, I'm going to challenge myself and I got to get some knowledge in my brain? Was there any point like that?
It just as early back as like me saying that I wanted to play basketball when I grew up, which is stupid because I never had any athletic ability whatsoever.
Sure.
But my grandmother said, "You're the wrong color for that." And it's just like, I knew that was offensive. I knew that was wrong. I was like, I may not be able to play basketball, but that's not the reason, just right away. And I remember my mom she wouldn't say that she was homophobic, but I definitely remember, I'm fairly effeminate for a straight man. I never was into like macho, like cars and sports. I hate sports, I never was into, people were into wrestling and I don't know, that kind of stuff. And I just never was. I was into theater. I was into poetry and movies and all that. And I definitely remember a moment that it felt like I was coming out to my mom as straight. Like my mom just assumed I was gay or whatever. And there was always that little like, if I would do something or act a certain way, which was just natural to me, my mom would say, "Do you need to tell me something?" Sure. And I'd be like, I knew what she was trying to say. She was trying to say, "Do you need to tell me you're gay?" And I would be like, "I don't know what you mean, Mom." And that would be the end of the conversation,
Sure.
And so growing up there, I always knew that there had to be somewhere else. There had to be somewhere better.
So you were like, I gotta get. You were like, I gotta get the fuck out of Florida, because I relate
100%, yeah.
I relate to this moment. Similar thing with my dad. And I talk about this in my solo show. There was a moment when he was driving. I was in the car, his SUV with him, and my mom was in the back seat. And apropos of nothing that either of us said, he started going on this rant about how he's being discriminated against at work because he is a straight man. And this was before Maryland had same-sex marriage. And his employer, Constellation Energy, I want to say is what the parent company was, because he was a shift operator at a nuclear power plant. Grew up 20 minutes from a nuclear power plant. Explains a lot about
That's nice.
Me. Yeah. But so they started offering benefits to same-sex couples because obviously they couldn't get married. But if you were a heterosexual couple, you had to be married.
Okay.
And he said he was being discriminated against, and then he pulled out quotes from Leviticus that he printed off the internet and threw them at me. So that was a moment when I was like, oh, okay, I have problems with you now. Let's dig into this for the next 10 years. And I remember saying, well, would you disown me if I was gay? And then it took him a day to get back to me.
Oh my God.
So I definitely remember that crystal clear. And
so you were on like disown layaway. He didn't know.
Basically. And he's the kind of guy like he'll never say you're right, I'm wrong. He's never said that when it comes to arguing. What he does is he just gets like really quiet and like that Bill Burr joke, like the redneck trail off thing. It's like so like when I got into college and got a little bit better at arguing, I would say things like and I would make points of like, well, wouldn't it make sense for everyone to just have the same rights and then nobody's being treated quote special, Dad?
Right.
Everyone just has the same rights. Everyone's treated equally. And then he's like, oh,
right.
That's I was like, okay, I can get through to you maybe bit by bit.
I mean, that does remind me. I don't know if it was the moment because I definitely felt like I kind of knew things were not great and I wanted to get out of there. But when on my 18th birthday, I'm born December 22nd, so it's also Christmas, you know.
Sure.
Everyone in my family was there for Christmas, and on my birthday, we went to Man on the Moon, Jim Carrey.
Yep.
So the adults went to Man on the Moon, which it came out December 22nd. And Toy Story 2 was where the kids went. And so when I got back to the house, my grandparents notably did not go to the movies. And I just, hey, why didn't you go to the movies? Oh, we don't really like Jim Carrey. Fair enough.
Sure.
Why didn't you go with the kids to Toy Story 2? And my grandma said, because we're boycotting Disney for letting gays have rights. And I was like, what? And that started an epic argument between me and my grandmother
oh my God.
during Christmas, where people kept coming up to me and going, okay, Derek, all right. And I would be like, what do you mean, okay, me? What about her? And so my entire family was against me, but it was the fight was
because
just between,
you're fighting with an elderly woman.
Exactly. And my granddad came out of the back room with a Bible and started reading from the Bible, like about it was almost like they're doing like a exorcism on me. But
Jesus Christ.
he was reading from the Bible, like homosexuality is blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, whoa. The Bible does not say homosexuality. What are you reading? And he was reading some new youth version of the Bible. And I was like stricken from the record, like that,
Right.
And then my grandmother said something like, you're about this close from going to hell, like holding up her And I said, okay, why would I want to go to heaven if people like you are allowed there? And she went, what?
God.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened in the room. Everyone was like, oh.
That's one of those record scratch kind of comments.
And she was like, what do you mean? And I said, you hate so much. I still remember exactly what I said. You hate so much. I cannot believe there is a paradise set aside for people like you. I was like, is Hitler in heaven? And it was like, all right. And my grandmother started crying. And I went, there's no crying in baseball. And I literally said that because I didn't have anything else to say. And I left the house and went on a walk.
Wow. Now that is one of the greatest holiday arguments I've ever heard.
And since then, I've had a very terrible relationship with them especially, and just like moreover my whole family.
Sure. So you got to get out of Florida. Where do you go?
So I stayed in Florida to go to college, but I went to college in St. Augustine, Florida, Flagler College.
I've heard
which is the oldest city in America, 1565.
Oh,
people
I
don't
did not know that.
I was a ghost tour guide for a while. And
well, if you got a flair for theater, I feel like that.
And I did theater.
Oh yeah, me too. I did theater in high school.
So I did theater in high school, and then I did theater in college. And
what'd you major in?
Theater. Yeah,
same here. I knew there's a reason that we
would
got
kind
along.
of regret that. If I could go back in time, I wish I could have picked, because now I'm in TV. I wish I had picked something a little more technical. I wish I had learned. I don't know if I necessarily feel like I wish I had learned film or whatever, or journalism. And honestly, I can't regret too much because I like where my life is now.
Sure.
Okay, so real quick tangent. Something I've told my daughter, and I have a 11-year-old daughter, is that I want to write a book called "The Only Thing I Don't Regret Is You," and other things I've told my daughter.
That's a great title.
Because that's the thing. Every time I think about something that I would like to change in my life, it's like, but I want to keep her, but obviously I can't keep her and not marry her mom.
Right.
So it doesn't work. It all falls apart. But no, I did theater, and yeah, and then right out of college, I met my daughter's mom, got married. Right out of college, after doing stand-up, I started doing...
so you got married young?
Yeah, very young.
How old
23.
were you? 23.
Yeah.
Right out of college. Yeah, that's young. That's young by my standards. Oh, yeah?
Well, it's right where I should have been learning about myself and growing. Instead, I was married.
Right.
And she should have been doing the same. And this is something I've explained to my daughter, too, you know? And so together, we moved to New York. So right out of college, after I was doing theater, I won a stand-up comedy contest in Florida. And then, you know, I knew I was going to be a very famous comedian.
So you started stand-up in Florida?
In Florida, yep.
When you got married? Before or after you got married?
Before I met her.
Before you met her, so you'd been doing it. Okay.
So I was doing it for a couple of years. And then we moved to New York. And then very quickly after, had my daughter.
Okay.
So we were only 1.5 years into being married when we had her.
Okay. And when did you move to New York?
2006.
2006. Okay.
5 maybe. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was early.
Yeah. So I had been here. I moved here in 2010. So so you had been in the city for a while by that point.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you what I was doing in 2005.
Were you in high school?
I was a freshman in college.
Gotcha. So I'm a little older. I'm 37, going on 38.
Okay. I'm 33. So you'd been in New York.
The only thing I don't regret is you, Will.
Well, I appreciate that, Derik. I always thought you were cool, and you were always like, you put me on your shows, and we always had very pleasant conversations. I feel like your daughter was always afraid of me every time I saw her.
She's a shy person, which is funny. She's definitely an in between. She's definitely her own person. But yeah, so you know, had her, and at the time I was struggling doing stand up. And selling purses at Saks Fifth Avenue. That was my job.
I could see that.
I was actually pretty good at it.
Yeah, you've got the face for it. I could see you like having a really. Do you wear like a
nice suit? Yeah,
wear a nice suit, and then
yeah,
and then you sell
I
purses.
sold bags to Tyra Banks.
Oh, that's cool.
Just the one time, but
it
is kind of funny to think about. And then, but it wasn't that long after having her that we realized we had no help, family, friends, or anything up here. And so I ended up moving to Tennessee. We moved to Tennessee to live closer to her family. And definitely at that time I was like, well, there goes my stand-up career. Now I'm living in Tennessee, you know?
Yeah.
And I became a teacher counselor at a group home for boys.
I
feel like I've lived like 10 different lives, maybe more.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating to me.
And no, I was a teacher counselor at a group home for boys, and I loved it. I honestly loved it. I felt like I connected with these kids. I felt like I was bettering their lives. And here I am in Tennessee. Like I already told you.
What part of Tennessee?
Greenville, so like East Tennessee.
Okay.
Almost North Carolina. Like it's
Gotcha.
very, very east.
Gotcha.
But most of the other counselors were very macho, sports, rednecky, you know, like strict, that kind of guy.
Sure.
Like, you do what I say, all that stuff. And I'm like, they don't listen to their dad. Like, why are they going to listen to you?
Yeah.
And so I was the total opposite of that.
Yeah.
Like, hey, talk to me. Let's talk. You know, hey, calm down. Let's just joke. Let's go over here, you know? And I was like, I'm really fucking good at this.
Yeah.
And then what starts happening is you're with a kid they're there for 4, 5, 6 months, and they finally get out. They get to go home. They pass their drug tests, and they get out of they pass school.
Sure.
And then 3 months later they come back, and that was just like,
start seeing the cycle.
Yeah,
of the system.
and when they come back, they now have a little less heart. They're a little more like, well, I can't get out of this shithole, like there ain't no helping me. And you're just like, well, it's because when they leave, they just go back to their shitty city with their shitty friends and their shitty family, and
it's kind of hard to make change when you're in the same environment.
Yeah, no, it's just a cycle.
Yeah, and then when you're getting stuck in that style, you can see. I think about this with like the prison system also. Once you're stuck in that cycle, you can, and because I remember being like in very dire straits in New York. Eventually, you just kind of like, all right, fuck it. I guess this is what I'm gonna be. So why try?
Yeah. It's like and there's an institutionalism mindset too. Right. Where they just feel like they can't get out. They can't. So I did feel like my job there was to be a little more compassionate somehow. And it was hard sometimes. I feel like I'm a pretty optimistic guy. Mm-hmm. And like, I definitely remember one of my, you shouldn't have favorites, but like this one kid, Jonathan, was one of my absolute favorites. He just seemed like a normal guy who had some really rough circumstances.
Yeah.
His mom was murdered by his dad.
Fuck that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he lived with his grandparents, and the grandma didn't know how to handle him. And so he was in and out of like state's custody. And he was also a big meth addict. And so he got a home pass at some point. This is like months into his program. He was clean. He got a home pass. And when he came back, he failed a drug test for marijuana. And we had this big group meeting. And he was just berated by his counselor and by this other, like the home, I don't forget, the supervisor or whatever. And I was just sitting here like, I feel so bad for this kid. And he's just slumped in this chair. And then finally, there was a moment of silence. And I was like, hey, can I say something? And I said, yeah, so he's a meth addict. And he failed for marijuana. And I literally let that sink in. And I went... And I stood up to give him a round of a standing ovation.
Yeah.
And his counselor definitely looked at me like, what the fuck? But the supervisor was like, that's a good point, Mr. Derik. Actually, maybe we should look at it a little different. And it kind of turned the whole...
It's like not all binary. It's
the kid definitely looked at me like, thank you, because I was the only one that, stood up for him. But so anyways, as much as I felt like that was good... It felt like I was doing good. It also felt it was rough.
Did it wear on you in a while? I talked to, because I remember I've talked to Drew Morgan, who used for the Well Read podcast.
Okay.
He tours with Trey Crowder. He was a public defender for a while, and he said it starts to wear on you.
It's I have a chipped tooth.
From
getting punched in the face multiple times by a kid.
Damn.
We would do restraints if someone was fighting or someone was trying to break property or whatever.
Sure.
We would do a 2-person restraint. And this particular kid was just known to he would always go off. He was very manic. So at one point he'd be like, "Hey, I'm having such a good day. We had pizza. We had this." And he'd be like kind of huffing
really
and puffing up. And I would look at like the other counselor and go, we're going to have to restrain him tonight, aren't we? And he'd be like, yeah. Because that high would come with a very low of, like, hey, you got to go to your room. You're waking people up. It's past 10 p.m. And he's like, why are you always fucking with me? And it would be like, all right, here we go. And then and there'd be no talking him out of it.
Sure.
And this one particular day, like he had a very bad home meeting and a very bad phone call. I allowed him to have time alone in this other room. Yeah. But then when he went over there, he started breaking property. And I went in to just like take the chair out of his hand. And every time I took the chair out of his hand before he could throw it out a window, he punched me in the face.
Oh my God.
And I wasn't allowed to restrain him. So basically I was over there.
You just kind of had to take it.
Well, in hindsight, I should have just let him break the window. It's not my fucking window.
Right.
So, but
let the state pay for it.
Exactly. And so... it wasn't that was like the last straw, but I definitely had always thought like we got to move back to New York. Like this is a short-term thing. We need the help obviously, but we want to move back to New York. And then taxes came back, thanks to Obama, we got child care credit or whatever. And we bought a car and moved back up to New York, which is unheard of. Once you leave New York, you usually don't come back.
Yeah, that is something I had always been afraid of. Like, even when I was in like my worst times, I was like, I never wanted to let this city, New York, win.
Sure.
I didn't want it to like chew me up and spit me out, because it always would depress me when I would see, especially comics, like either move back to where they're from, or like like not, or like lose. It doesn't upset me like comics that quit, because everybody want to find your thing. So I just kind of want people to find what that thing is.
Oh, of course.
But it always used to bug me, because I feel like shitting on New York's kind of like a thing a lot of comics do when you live here. But I love living here. I've loved it when it's good, like right now, and I've loved it when it fucking sucked. I never wanted to move. I was always trying to figure out, how can I stay here, even when I was like homeless for like a week.
Oh, wow.
Well, it wasn't exactly my fault. My old roommate had a psychotic break, and the police kicked my door down.
That'll do it.
Yeah, I'm working on a pitch for that. But I like that I have that story. So you get back.
I mean, that definitely was always the plan. Tennessee is just, I don't know. I mean, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
That's what I've heard.
I will say, I did start doing stand up a little bit there again before I moved back.
And where were where were you doing stand up in?
There was
in
a
Tennessee?
Comedy Zone in Johnson City, and I did a couple of other places. I actually started my own. It wasn't a running show, but like there was a local pizza place called Ella's, and I was like, hey, would you ever do a stand up show? And I had to completely clean my act, because there was like church groups and stuff that came out. And,
sure.
I would say I did well. There's no tape of it to prove it, but
right.
But,
yeah, you had to be like super like Brian. You had to make Brian Regan look like David Tell.
Yeah.
I imagine.
I will tell you. So, but like, if you want a stand-up story, like one of my weirdest, hardest moments, like doing stand-up, was in Tennessee.
Oh, really?
I did 2 shows back to back in the Comedy Zone in Johnson City.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 shows on a Friday, 2 shows on a Saturday.
Yep.
And I think I was doing a half hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first night, no, it had to have been less than a half hour. It was like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I think was what they told me to do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first show of Friday, I felt like I killed it. I mean, laughter the entire time. I used to end my show with stripping my clothes off, and I'd be in a blue unitard. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of that.
I don't think I have. Maybe.
I used to do a thing of like the angry superhero. Like, what would a superhero really look like in real life? Because they always look like Superman is like, what, it's so suave. Mm-hmm. And so I used to do this. Like, it was hard for me to pull my clothes off one by one while I'm angry at some guy. I'm going to kick your ass. It was this whole thing. Anyways.
Yep.
Tennessee people love it. But that is how I used to end my act. But I got off stage. I'm in this high of like, oh my God. As I'm walking to the audience, people are patting my back like, you were great, you were great. I went up to my hotel room, and I had an hour and a half to the next show, and I'm just like high on life. I'm living it. Mm-hmm. I come back downstairs, prepared for the next show, and the host was like, hey man, can I talk to you real quick? And I was like, yeah, sure. He was like, hey, so you went like way short. And I was like, oh, what? What do you mean? He was like, you went like 14 minutes, and you got to go like 25 at least. And I was like, oh shit, I'm sorry. It felt like I was up there longer.
Sure.
But now I'm like, so now what they're going to hear is not that I killed. They're going to hear that the dude doesn't have his time. And so second show, I got back up. And now I haven't had any time to prep. I'm like, fuck, what do I add? Yeah. So I added some stuff that I had been doing in New York that had done well in New York.
But probably doesn't play good at the Comedy Zone second show.
There was some stuff that I used to do about looking like an accidental racist. Like this, it was this dumb thing, but like, talk like just like tongue twisting kind of things where I would say something accidentally and then look racist.
Right.
And I had at least, and these were all real moments that happened to me. Like I was at J.C. Penney's and I wanted to try on pants, and the girl behind the counter was black. I was actually hitting on her before this happened, and then I was like, "Where's the where can I try this on?" And she pointed behind me and said, "The fitting room." But when I looked at the sign, the G had fallen off, so it said "fitting room," and I was like, "Oh, don't you mean fitting room?" And she was like, "What?" And she didn't look at the sign, so she just thought I was like saying, "Hey, black people are supposed to say fitting room."
Sure.
And I was like, "No, because you don't pronounce the G. You can't pronounce the G," or something like that. And she was like, so that was one.
Shit.
So I had this whole, and they got worse and worse and worse as I'm telling this. And so this ended up being a 4-minute. So it's basically second show. I start 7 minutes in, I'm killing, and then I'm like, all right, I got to add time.
Sure.
So I start telling these jokes. This chunk of jokes lasts about 4 minutes, and I'm dying.
Sure.
There's no laughter at all. People who were laughing are now just looking at me like, what the fuck?
Sure.
And again, they worked really well in New York, so I'm now sweating like, oh no. And then I'm like, all right, now what do I do? Because there goes that material.
Yep.
And then now that I'm bombing, now I'm forgetting my act. So
yeah,
now I'm bombing more.
Creates a spiral.
Exactly. And then in that show, I started adding act outs where I never did act outs before. And so I used the microphone like in an act out. I was killing a shark on land because I used to have this joke about like being afraid of sharks and like how I could beat the shit out of a shark on land. It was a dumb joke.
Yeah.
But I added this act out of beating the shark over the head with the microphone, and I ended up breaking the microphone. So that the head of the microphone was just a little jiggly for the remainder of the set. And then near the end of the set, I did another act out using the microphone as a bat again, but this time doing like a swing, and the microphone head flew off and hit a woman in the face.
Oh my God.
Who was in the front row.
Fuck.
And then I did my superhero ending.
Like just breeze right through that lady going down.
And then I got off the stage and I looked at the host and I was like, how long was I on? And, and he goes, about 15, 16 minutes.
Oh, no. So you only added 2 minutes. Well, yeah, because when you're bombing, it shortens up really quickly. Oh, my God.
Yeah. And so after the show, he was like, dude, you need to do something because tomorrow you got to make that time. You got to get up to 25 minutes or else you're never working here again. And I was like, fuck. And I stayed up all night long. I went back to my house, which was only a half hour away. I found all my old notebooks and my laptop with a doc that I had on it. And I was like, I've been doing stand-up for 5 years. Where is all my material? All of a sudden, it was like I forgot all my material. And I created a whole new act. And I actually, the first show of the second night, I killed. I did really, really well. And I got off the stage and I looked at the guy and he gave me the thumbs up and he was like, you went about 27 minutes. And he gave me a high five. And then the second show I did even better. And I still never heard from them again.
Yeah, that's one of the many things that I think drives comedians insane eventually is you're either like second guess jokes either work great, they work great for a while, they can work great for a while, and then they can suddenly just stop. And then you can do great, and it cannot matter.
Yeah.
That's...
I definitely was on the lazy side of being a comedian. I used to think that you could just get up there and talk. And so, like, if I look back at I did stand up about 10 years.
Okay.
The very beginning,
so
right around the time.
For a while.
Yeah. Right around the time when I was in Tennessee, that was probably year 7, 6 or 7. But like when I started doing stand-up, I was very physical.
Yep.
I loved like Dane Cook, and my favorite comedian was Steve Martin. Like I was just a very, physical comedian. I won the contest like 10 weeks in a row and won the prize of coming back as a feature act. And I did that pretty well. And it was all physical. And then when I started thinking like, oh, I need to write more smart jokes, then I started not doing as well.
Right.
Because I was telling these jokes that and then that was part of I got to move to New York where they tell smart jokes. And then moving up to New York, it was a struggle because I was like, my jokes about driving didn't
Was this
work.
New York the second time?
This was still the first. No, this was the first time. So now my jokes, like, they just didn't. They didn't work the same way. Like I used to have this joke about driving drunk and whatever, and like people in New York just don't drive, and it's just like, oh no. So it's like I had to throw out all the act that I had in Florida and create a new act. And then now I'm in Tennessee trying to tell jokes that worked in New York,
right?
And now they're not working. So I had to come up with a whole new act. But the best joke that I had in Tennessee was you can't get unsweet tea anywhere. You go to a store, you'd be like, hey, can I get some unsweet tea? They're like, what the hell did he just say? Unsweet tea? No, I think he said, sweet tea. And that kills in New York, it kills in Florida, and it kills in Tennessee. But then, so then we moved back up to New York. And
what year is this?
This would be 2010.
2010. So so I met you on your second go round.
So now Zoe's 2. And very, very quickly, my then wife and I realized we just do not love each other.
Oh, shit.
And well, it was always rocky. We were always a bad mix. Like I said, it's that time when you're supposed to be growing, learning about yourself. And
it's just that you learned about yourselves and then realized that you don't like each other.
We don't like each other. And then especially that second round of New York, we barely hung out. I was doing stand-up every night, every other night, 2, 3, 4 shows a night, trying to get my time in.
Sure.
And obviously she, was lonely and bitter, like of that. And then when she would have her time, she would hang out with her sister, go out, so I would be home with the baby. So literally it was like either I was home or she was home with the baby.
Right.
And we just were like, let's call this quits. And
is that what's called amicable?
We as amicable as you could possibly. I mean, we definitely do not like each other, and I hate the word co-parenting because to me it's just parenting. I don't get what the co-parenting is.
Yeah.
But like we do that as best as possible. And my current wife, my now and future always.
And when did you get married again?
We got married in October, so we've been together for 6 years. My wife Mindy. And I was going to say she would kill me if I didn't start mentioning her at some point during this.
No. I have the same thing. Well, I will say, Mindy, even though I have not met you, Derik seems like he's in a really great place, and I credit all of that to you and your daughter. Obviously, I'm sure she's a part of it. So you weren't like you weren't like afraid to get married again.
Oh no, so my ex-wife and I. We got divorced, I think, 2012. And then that's when I started, I think right around that time is when I started doing the tiniest stand-up show. That year was hard for me. 2012 was really rough.
Yeah.
I was definitely depressed. I was doing new material. It was also really good creatively. I was able to find a new 5 to 10 minutes of pretty good stuff that was about being sad, getting a divorce, having a kid, being a single parent, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But it was also killing me. It was too cathartic. And so that's really around the time that I was like, I don't know if I can do stand-up anymore. Oh, and then, I started doing material. It was actually doing really well, the material. And then I started dating again on OkCupid. And I started telling jokes about dating and like trying to date, and they didn't do as well.
Sure.
And I thought to myself, like, you don't really like me or love me or care about me, audience. You just want to see me bleed. And that was that moment that I was like, oh, I thought this was therapy, but instead, when I'm actually getting better, like it's not therapy. It's almost like, I don't know. I look back on that time when I was doing stand up and I realized.
And is this all in like the alt scene where you're doing clubs at all?
Yeah, I was doing. Well, no, I did stand up New York. I did. What's another club?
Comic Strip.
I did. I tried out
New York Comedy
Comic
Club.
Strip. New York Comedy Club. I'm trying to remember.
That's the one on 24th Street over by 3rd.
I think so.
I don't think the Stand was a thing
No,
yet.
that was not a thing, no. I auditioned for the Comic Strip, And I want to say I even, no, I did that at the very beginning of when I came back, and I still have the tape. I did a pretty killer 5 minute set. Artie Lang was there, Colin Quinn was there,
Oh,
and
is this when
Sherrod Small was the host, and
Oh,
he
this is
loved
when
it.
was this when they would like critique you on
Yeah,
stage afterwards?
yeah.
Yeah, I remember
And they
this.
gave me very glowing critiques. Sherrod Small, when he came up, he was like, "You fucking killed it, man." And I was like, "Thanks." He was like, "No, no, look at me, like you fucking killed it." And I was like, "Great." And then at the end of that night, they did the this person, this person, this person, and it was me. And then the other person was like, and they were like, "Oh, I think there's a tie." I'm like, "Wait, what? That wasn't a tie." So then they did the two of us again, and I clearly won.
Right.
I'm not bitter about this still. I clearly won. And then they were like, "Oh, it still sounds pretty close." And the owner, they were like, "What do you think?" To the owner, and the owner was like, "Got to go with the tits." And so he went with the girl because she had tits. That's what he said, at least.
Yeah. Well, I've heard stories like there's a video of like Judah Freelander talking about being at the comic strip, and then before he got past, he's like the owner, and I think this might have been Lucian, who I never met. I think he had passed by the time I got up here, but that's not unusual. That's not unusual that to hear that in that room. I think.
And that was just what I mean. Like when it comes to me being a lazy comedian, I was like, all right, well then I'm never auditioning here again. You know what I mean? I should have not taken it that way. I should have been like, all right, fuck you. I'm going to show you that I'm good, and just kept trying. And
well, my first time at the comic strip when they did that, everyone said very hurtful things about me, and I'm still upset with several of those comics. If I ever get a chance to interview, well, if I ever get a chance to interview any of them, I'm totally bringing that up. Not that they would remember; it's just part of the thing. It was part of the thing.
Sure.
But
well,
then, but then I eventually got it. But then, like late night spots at the comic strip when you're late in like 3 hours to perform at 1 a.m. for 4 people is, I don't know if that's how you develop. I wasn't developing artistically doing that.
I did check spots at Stand Up New York a lot. And it's like, this sucks. I mean, not Stand Up New York. Is that still around? It is, right?
Yeah, Stand Up New York.
I loved
still
it.
Around.
It's just when you do a check spot and you realize, and you're telling jokes and you're wondering why aren't these going over at all, and then you realize, oh, that family's from Germany and that family's from, you know what I mean? And you're like, oh, sure. And not only are they not paying attention to you, they really don't understand what you're saying. They don't get the references.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what am I? And then even the open mic scene. You're performing for comedians that are writing in their notebooks, and you have to buy 2 drinks or whatever, and so everyone's an alcoholic,
right? And it's for someone who's trying to become a better comic, it's helpful to be in front of audiences that like comedy and want to see
sure,
and want to see comedy. The system right now is not geared towards that. It's geared to frustrate you until you eventually decide to do your own thing.
Well, then in even the best possible circumstances doesn't feel like it's teaching you, because if you're just like doing, kind of a hacky comedy in front of like a room full of really supportive people, that's also not quite learning how to do stand-up. But I would say, to take it a different way, I realized that doing stand-up, for me at least, so I'm just speaking for myself, makes you less of a real human being. Because I would be at a party, and I would be talking to someone, and I would not be testing material necessarily.
Sure.
But if I said something that made that other person laugh, I would be like, "Hey, I'll be right back," and I got to go to the bathroom, and I would write it down in my phone or something, and then I would come back, and then I would continue a conversation. And again, like if I said anything that made someone laugh, it was like I was never quite present. I was always kind of surface level, not quite getting to know them, just trying to make them laugh. And then several times I was accused of testing out material. Like, it's like, oh, you're a comedian, right? Like, is this like a joke that you do in your act? And it's like, no, I'm not. I never do that. But it's like, I kind of am, if you think about it. Like, I wasn't like doing material for them. But if material came out of what I was doing, then that became material.
Sure.
So I realized I don't know. It just made me feel. Oh, and also, do you ever feel like we have like a warped sense of humor since we hear the worst, darkest
Oh,
jokes?
I definitely
I have to
know.
stop myself from making jokes about people's dads dying and stuff.
I definitely know I talk a different way when I'm around comedians than when I'm around non-comedians.
Yeah.
Like absolutely.
Like right where my wife and I are just bought a house or are buying a house.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to a boss, a coworker, but he was a boss of mine at one point, and he was like, "Oh, my dad died right nearby there," and I just paused because the first thing in my head was a joke, like a joke about, oh, like I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but it was at the expense of his dad.
Right.
And I stopped myself and I said, I almost made a joke about your dad, but then I decided not to. And he laughed and he said, "You should have. I would have."
Uh-huh.
It was like,
Yeah, you kind of have to when you're around like normal people. I'll say, you kind of have to know what their boundaries are, so you know like where to go.
yeah, like nothing really offends me
Yeah,
except for commuting. Like
and
everything about
nothing,
commuting.
yeah, nothing real. It takes so much for me to get like genuinely angry over something that somebody said.
I guess that being said, my mom offends me.
Right. Well, the other thing is like I don't think I'm very funny on off stage.
Mm.
On stage, I feel I have gotten laughs, but I don't think I'm very funny in conversation. My fiance says that to people all the time. He's like,
Or he's not funny.
He's like, Will's a comedian. You wouldn't know it to look at him. Like most people who meet me are like, I can't see you as a comedian. I'm like, good because I do not want you to ask me to tell a joke.
I mean, I've been told that too, though. Like, I definitely like, oh, you don't look like a comedian, because they have in their head a very specific comedian that they're thinking of, or their favorite comedian. And I'm just not that person. But yeah.
So it almost sounds like you it started to feel artificial to you when comedy's supposed to be about being very real.
Right. And at the most real that I was, it was when I was very depressed.
Uh-huh.
You know, I wasn't telling just like puns and stupid jokes anymore. I was telling like very painful, hurtful things that were happening to me on the regular.
Mm-hmm.
And I getting laughs out of it. And so there was an art to it. That was the first time in 10 years
Right.
at that point that I felt like I was actually an artist. And then I stopped. I just quit.
Did you just have a moment where you're like, I don't think I want to do this anymore?
I started, at first I started, it was going to be a break.
Uh-huh.
And then I just wasn't doing it. I was dating on OkCupid or whatever,
Sure.
like, and just trying to stay. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't
and probably
healthy.
be a father to your kid too. I imagine.
I probably could have done that better, but at the time. And then the more I didn't do it, the less I missed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then OkCupid kind of became like dating became the new obsession.
That became your new project.
My new top 5.
Uh-huh.
And then oddly enough, that became again sort of like I don't feel like I know who I am anymore.
Uh-huh.
I feel like I'm very depressed, and then I'm going on these dates and pretending to be a person I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Like the optimistic person I think I should be, I'm presenting,
Yeah.
you know? And then I was ready to give up dating and probably start stand-up again. I was like, you know what? I need to just find out who I am. I was doing therapy at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided I was going to shut down my OkCupid, but I was going to go on one last date.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on one last date with my wife
Now wife.
And it was this, you know, I was such a dick too. I was like, well, I was gonna cancel my account, but I figured I might as well just have one more date or something like that. And she was like, well, don't do me any favors. Like, do you want to go on a date or not? And she says she felt at date 3, like I felt it right away.
Mm-hmm.
Like she walked in and just like talking to each other, I was like, this is a totally different person. And to explain who she is briefly, like she is like a real woman. Whereas everyone I dated before that felt like a girl, you know, and I felt like a boy. Like I didn't feel like a man even. Like I felt like I was still a teenager dating. Now at this point I'm like in my late 20s, like, you know, like almost 30. And, but she was a real woman with a real job. She'd been working in news for like the last 15 years. Like, and she's not that, she's half a year older than me, but she had started working in TV and news back when she was in college.
Uh-huh.
So she always had her shit together.
Yeah.
And I had never met anyone like that, let alone been sexually interested in someone
now,
like
I feel
that.
like there's some parallels here. My fiance's, she used to work in news also.
Really?
So yeah, so and again, she's been like very with it very early on, whereas I spiraled a lot and then got it together eventually.
I definitely always pretended to be an adult, but I never felt like one inside,
Yeah.
But yeah, started dating her. I realized I need to get my shit together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was also like, I also can't bullshit this woman. She'll see through it all, And so I was like, I gotta, I don't know. I almost feel like I wanted to ask her for like a checklist of things. Like, I'll do it. Just give me a checklist. And I just.
This is the beginning of a movie, I think.
No,
called the checklist, where you're just going through, this, like, it's like The Good Place meets, like, I don't know, Made in Manhattan or something, and you're just trying to become a better person.
And it wasn't like she was asking me to be a better person,
but she
I
made
knew she wouldn't stay around if I was still this, like, the person that I was.
And then she clearly made you want to do that.
Exactly. Do that. And then it was probably a year in, or less than a year in, where she was, and at this point I was really struggling. I think I had started. Did you know I did a show with Caitlin Bailey at
Stand Up New
York.
Yes, I do remember.
So this is after I technically quit stand up. I hosted that show, but wasn't really doing stand up. I kind of was like riffing as a host or whatever. But I was doing that. I enjoyed that. But still, like, my heart wasn't completely in it. And I did some stories for The Moth around this time too. And I did like that. And around this, and then at that time too, I was a personal assistant for a rich family on the Upper East Side. And that was ridiculous.
I'm so sorry.
I mean, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I've never been spoken to by someone like, I mean, literally, I messed up on a spreadsheet, like a packing list for their Southampton home, and this woman told me, I understand why your wife left you. I went, what?
God damn.
She literally said that to me.
Oh my God. I want this woman's address so I can push her into traffic.
And then she said, she was like, why can't you get this or whatever? And I made like one mistake. It was something stupid. Like, I put a colon where there was a semicolon. And she was like, what was your last job? Oh yeah, you were laid off, right? And I was like, yeah, I was laid off. It wasn't my fault that I got, laid off. And she was like, if you were any good, they would have kept you. That's what a layoff is. And I'm like, my God. Yeah.
This is a character that a screenwriting teacher would be like, that's too unrealistic.
I wish I could tell you her name, and maybe off the podcast I will, because the name, I wish I could use this name in a movie, because the name doesn't even sound real.
Like Beddington McArthurson. Basically,
yeah, you know her.
Yeah.
And so anyways, she used to, I could probably get away with this. She had, I guess, a housekeeper named Ging. They lived at a very fancy apartment in Upper East Side, and she had this housekeeper named Ging. And my job when I was there would be I would come in the morning, I would go downstairs, and I would answer emails. She would send emails throughout the night. So sometimes I would get there, and there'd be 70 emails from her. And they'd be like one-line things. We need to start a packing list for Southampton. I want to look in for tennis for my, the boy. I want to do this for this school tour. I want whatever, little things.
Sure.
And don't forget to, don't forget to remind me it's my nephew's birthday today. And then I would be like, it's your nephew's birthday today? I would respond back, and then she would respond back immediately, don't be cute, I meant later.
Oh my God.
And then I would have to go up there, and she'd have this long list of things for me to do, like update the Southampton packing list.
Sure.
And literally it would be like, if you look in the Z drive, you'll see the master, and then you'll see the years 2013 and 2014. I want to make a new one for this year that is a combination of this one, since it will be taking less stuff, right? And then I would have to figure out how to combine 3 lists, and I'd go upstairs, and then she would be like, all right, she'd start marking it with a highlighter and pen, and then, okay, if there's an arrow pointing this way, it means I like the way it's worded in this one. If it's an arrow pointing this way, I want to take it off. If I highlighted it, it means like, and then I would do that, and then I would come upstairs, and then she'd be like, why didn't you alphabetize it? And we're like, but you didn't ask me to. And she'd be like, I thought it was common sense. Yeah. And so this was this woman. So we'd have all these pieces of paper.
Uh-huh.
And then she would keep scratch paper. She
Right.
would mark a line through it and keep it. And she would literally go, gang! And gang would be like, oh, man, I wish I could do her name because it works so well. But it's like, coming. She would come in and she'd be like, here you go. And she's like, put this in the scratch paper. And she was just like a James Bond villain.
Right. So you thought, this sucks. I will work with people who are on reality TV shows.
Basically, that's what started it. I hated my life. I hated everything about it. And my girlfriend at the time was like, have you ever thought about getting into TV? And I
Seems
said,
like kind of a natural progression.
Had never thought about it.
Uh-huh.
Never once thought of it. All through doing theater, doing stand-up, I'd never once thought about trying to get into, behind the camera in TV in any sense of the word. And she was like, when we watch movies, you give critiques like, oh, they should have stopped it here. Like, that would have been more interesting. Or what if they should have done this? And she's like, you should do TV. You have an eye for it. She helped me learn editing. She, working in news, she was able to give me access to an Avid, editing. Yep. I taught myself Avid. And then a friend of hers was an EP on a show he had seen me do stand-up. And he was like, do you think he would help me punch up a script a little bit? And so for free, I helped him punch up a script, which ended up getting canceled. So I didn't get a job through that.
Sure.
But then when he had a job for me as a PA, he was like, this is a lot less than you're making as a personal assistant. But and I was like, please, yes.
Yeah,
I want
just
out.
anything. Yeah.
And so that was it. And that was only like 5 years ago.
Wow. And you're a producer now.
Yeah, I'm a story producer.
For reality TV. So how much of this can you explain to me? Because I know the basic concept is that most reality TV is not actually real.
Sure.
Like it's
I've worked at the full spectrum.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
So when you're putting together a reality show, and I don't know if you can tell me what shows you've worked on, but what does your job entail exactly? Like, how do you piece together, I guess, a coherent episode from people loudly yelling at each other?
Well, okay, so I can tell you, I probably won't be able to mention all the names, but I can tell you right now I'm working on Queer Eye on Netflix. I also, this last year, I worked on Southern Charm on Bravo. And I kind of, in the last year, I've gone back and forth between those two, where I'll do one season of one and then come back to do another season, because the seasons they're never at the same time.
Right. You never worked on Summer House by any chance, did you?
No, but I worked at the company that does Summer House.
Oh, okay, because my fiance's best friend worked on that.
Okay, so I know her.
Dina?
Or him. Who?
Dina? Know anybody? Do you know anybody named Dina?
I don't think I know anyone named Dina.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you more off mic.
But and then I just was in Fiji for 6 weeks for Love Island on CBS.
Now that's got to be pretty nice.
It was very nice being in Fiji. It was not very nice working 6 nights a week overnight and only having that one sort of day off because technically I worked until 4 a.m. that day, slept all day, and then didn't have to work again until the next day. Didn't really feel like a day off, but it was a very good experience. But just it was very hard work that I'm still recovering from, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah, wow.
Yeah, just food, like your shit is irregular. Just has to be. If you work overnights and you're a morning shitter, not to get
sure.
TMI. Yeah, but so anyway, so yes. How do you make a coherent episode of people yelling at each other? Yeah.
Well, Queer Eye isn't like that. I actually like Queer Eye. But the shows that my fiance likes to unwind is a lot of that, like Below Deck or shows like that.
Sure. So I can't speak for all reality shows, and I can't even speak for the ones I currently work on. Now, Queer Eye is obviously an amazing show, very inspirational.
Yeah.
Southern Charm is great. It's a very funny show. And being from the South, I get a kick out of it. But so I've definitely worked out on the spectrum of it's as real as it could possibly get, which is probably Queer Eye. And then I've worked on shows that are like as fake as you can possibly make them. Because what they're getting out in the field is very boring.
Right.
So you just try to do whatever you can. But I would say, like,
do you have a general idea of I'm sorry,
no, go ahead.
Do you have a general idea of what you want to do before they film, or do you basically get footage and then start thinking of ideas?
I mean, all shows run different, but more or less you have what they call a beat sheet for what you'd like to get out in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I worked on a show called American Restoration.
Okay.
History Channel show. And the beat sheet is, this part needs to be fixed,
mm-hmm.
and this guy will be coming by the shop to deliver this piece.
Yeah.
So that's inherently in the story, but you need to know what you're filming.
Right.
So you're going to film his arrival. You're going to film the mechanic talking to him about the piece.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to film the history of the piece, or whatever, if there's a story, because a lot of it was like historical stories.
Sure.
And then you film him talking to his men about what he's going to do, like with the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, from there, it's all this like beauty shots of B-roll of them working or whatever. But you have to have a plan going in. You can't just be like, or I'm standing here, and then whatever happens, happens.
Sure.
Because you have to show up on the day the guy comes. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it's like, it's
course.
obviously, inherently reality is a little fake. The camera has to. I love when you see a shot of like a person sleeping. They're sleeping and they're snoring, and it's like a funny moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but like even in best case scenario, she woke up to let them into her house,
right,
and then went back to bed. So she's either pretending to be she has to be pretending to be asleep, right?
Sure.
So that's the thing. It's like, so that's obviously faked,
right?
But she does sleep. Sleep is something people do. Everyone does. So it's like, it's a moment that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. So it's like, but even in the best case scenario, if you think about it, when you're shooting a scene, it's just a conversation at a bar or something. That conversation could go 2 hours long.
Right.
And they can hit on a billion different topics, what does your wife think, or how many years has that happened? When did you move here?
Yeah.
Until it starts getting really good,
Yeah.
And so you try to figure out as a story producer, how do we get to that good part as quickly as possible?
Sure.
And that's basically the story producer's job is, all right, obviously you need to show them entering. They sit down, they order their drink. You got to show that, or else it's weird when the drinks are just there.
Yep.
And then, okay, they got to talk a little bit, because it's weird to just jump into, when did your wife leave?
Sure, yeah.
So then it's like, all right, let's do this. This builds up. And then, and even then you might go, it feels really weirdly leading when that person asks that question. It feels so directory prompty. Why don't we just get rid of that and have him just say the information or start telling the story?
Sure.
So it's like, and I tell people, like, it's not inherently in changing something, you are faking it in a way.
Sure.
I should say, when you edit, any editing is changing.
Yeah.
And so basically the story producer's job is to keep the integrity of the scene, even though you're changing it.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot show a 2-hour completely raw verite scene on TV.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make any sense.
Especially for these kinds of shows, because real life is not inherently very interesting. It's interesting in kind of spurts.
Exactly.
So you're essentially working. You're basically like editing. You're good partsing.
Exactly.
Life. Yeah.
And then, like I said, like, depending on how you play something, like if you have a guy, and I want to remind you, this is not Queer Eye or Southern Charm that I'm talking about.
Of course.
But like, if you have a guy that says, like, I love my dad, I don't hate my dad, but like sometimes I definitely regret, or I feel a little bitter about things that he did in my life. And if you then get rid of him saying, I love my dad, I don't hate my dad, and just have the part where he's like, I feel bitter sometimes about my dad, that definitely changes what he said.
Yeah.
And so for me, I have a line. I'd like to think I have a line of like truthiness, where there's a line, it's horizontal line of above the line is fact, or at least in the direction of truth. and below the line is a lie or in the direction of a lie.
Sure.
And I'm okay with sort of a wavering in the direction of truth line as long as it's above lie.
Sure.
So, like, for example, I've worked on shows where there's a conversation that happens briefly in the kitchen, but the most of the conversation happens in the living room. Do you need to show them having that little conversation in the kitchen just to have them get into the living room? Or it just is like, how much time do we have here to spend on this fucking scene that ultimately is just about this?
Right.
Know? And so you're like, no, you know what? We don't need the kitchen. Let's just have them talk in the living room. They don't really say much in the kitchen anyways. And then you get to a point where you realize, oh shit, he did start the conversation in the kitchen. There is that one line that he said in the kitchen that starts this entire conversation.
Yeah.
So you cheat the line. You take the audio from the kitchen. As long as you're not showing his mouth moving, you're just showing the other person. And it could be very quick of like, how was your day? That's what starts the whole conversation.
Yeah. Which is that essentially keeps the integrity of what actually happened.
But like, you know, some people will be like, I told you it's all fake, you know? And it's like, well, he did say, how's your day?
Yeah.
He just said it in the kitchen, and I didn't want to have to spend 10 minutes just to get how's your day in the conversation.
Exactly. And that's different from like just cutting up a bunch of random words, like essentially doing a deep fake.
Sure. And I definitely have been asked to do that before. And I have said no up to a point.
Sure.
So I've definitely worked on that show too. But like, that's the thing. Like, so in the, you know, situation of, let's say a guy is like, I love my dad. But I definitely am bitter or whatever. I would fight to keep it that way as much as possible. And if I had to get rid of, like, let's say he said, I love my dad, I don't hate him at all, but I definitely feel bitter. Maybe he says, I don't hate my dad at all, but I feel bitter. Maybe that is okay.
Yeah.
Or maybe he says, I love my dad, but I definitely feel bitter. Maybe that's okay. Maybe the whole line isn't. But then if you want me to try to make him say, and I could make him say, I hate my dad, I don't love him at all.
Yeah.
I could make him say that.
You could do that.
But I refuse to do that.
Yeah. Depends on how nice they were to you on set.
That's 100. That's definitely in the opposite direction. And I that's not the integrity of the scene. And yeah.
Well, dude, it's awesome to see you land in a place that is creative. And I feel like is working in show business, is in show business, and to see you like traveling. And I know Mike Lawrence was writing on Love Island. Awesome. It's really cool to like not see you for a long time and then to see like I almost feel like we're graduating from a period, a time in our lives. Not saying I still consider myself a comedian, even though I'm not doing open mics every single night. But it's very cool to see you and where you're at now, especially with where I'm at now. It's really great to see you at, and it seems like you enjoy what you're doing.
I mean, no, I honestly feel creatively fulfilled. And it all started like when the first show that I did a show called Extreme Cheapskates, and I started off as a PA, and then I was promoted to associate producer by the end of the show, which is actually a pretty fast track. There are PAs that are PAs for 10 years. Wow. But I was just like, I'm almost 30 years old. Actually, I might have been. I was probably at that point, I was 31 or so. And I was like, I can't be the oldest PA. And I just hustled. I ran circles around people. And I was in we would have these big brainstorming sessions. And I wouldn't be afraid to say, hey, I have an idea. What if we film here? What if we do this? What if this was part of the story? Like, oh, what if that? And it's that whole idea of like being undeniable. I was like, I will talk. I will give you my ideas. I will push back. I will be creative. And I loved it. And, each show I've had ups and downs, obviously. And my wife is sick of me every single show that I'm on. I'm like, I wish I had more responsibility. I wish I had more creative control. And she's like, you say this every show. And I don't know when I'll ever get enough.
I think it'll be when you're EPing. on your own show.
Yeah, but then the network gives you notes.
Right.
And you have to do those notes.
Well, when you are CEO of your own network,
yeah.
And you are just having to work with the deals with the streaming channels or syndication runs.
I actually have a kind of a weird, like a theory of if you can think of a bell curve, or what do they call it? This is called a bell curve, right?
Yeah.
So on the low left-hand side is where you have your least creative control possible, and then as you get up, so I would say like that's a PA, that's an intern, that's a whatever, and then as you climb the rank to associate producer, story producer, editor is around there too. You start going higher on that curve, but you're still on the left-hand side of it.
Yeah.
And then once you get to the very top of that curve, you're possibly a showrunner of a show. You have, or maybe you're the EP at the network, and you're really like, it's your baby, and you're giving all these notes, and the show becomes what you want it to become. As the showrunner, you're out there in the field, and you're getting that good footage and whatever, and like that's the pinnacle of creative control. But you're still not in charge, because as you go along the bell curve, you start becoming the owner of the production company, the head of the network, whatever. You actually start going down in creative control, because now you're delegating.
Sure.
Because you obviously have to trust the people below you to make those creative decisions, or else what's the point?
Right.
Like, you're not going to be in the edit room for every show, every episode. You're making deals, with the you know what I mean? Like, you
so
become more of a business person rather than a creative person.
Yeah, so finding that sweet spot where you have as much creative control and you're still on the creative side, rather almost like I don't know if you watch F is for Family, but when Frank goes from being a baggage handler to being like the in between the bosses and the union in between.
Okay,
it's almost like that, because now he's got to like split the interests of both sides.
Well, that's what I always feel like. That's where I want to be, is in that sweet spot of like the most creative control possible, knowing I still have a boss, and I'm fine with that.
Excellent. I think you're going to have that, man. And I'm trying to get, and when I get somebody to pay for me to do a stand-up show in Antarctica, and and I need that filmed, I think you're going to be the guy to do that.
I'll be there.
Excellent, man. Dude, it's been great talking to you. I really appreciate you do this, man. And the next time we see each other, let's maybe like have it not be in 2026.
Sure.
Thanks for talking to me, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Is there anything you want to plug before we get out? Queer Eye on Netflix?
Sure. Queer Eye, Netflix, season 5. It's in Philadelphia. And I'll most likely be back for Southern Charm season 7 on Bravo. Southern Charm's a very funny show. To toot my own horn, the episode that I story produced for season 6 got 5 stars on Vulture.
Nice. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
It's really good to catch up with Derik. I'm glad that he is in a pretty good place now, compared to what I knew he was going through the last time we were doing comedy together. And it's nice to see one of my friends end up in a really good place where they're really satisfied creatively with what they're doing. So thank you, Derik, for coming over. It was great to see you, man. And if you guys enjoyed the show, please feel free to leave a rating on iTunes, or add us to your favorite playlist on Stitcher, or follow on Spotify. All these are little things to help other people find the show. If you know a friend who you think might enjoy listening to this, please don't keep it a secret. You guys are my best advocates for this show. So thank you very much for listening. And I want to give a shout out to my supporter on Patreon at the awesome producer level, Mary Beth Mooney. Thank you so much again for your support. And if you want to hear your name shouted out at the end of the show here, you can go to patreon.com/awesomedisaster. You can check out some of the rewards that I have over there. I love what I'm doing with this show, and I like what I'm doing over on the Patreon. So it means the world that you guys are enjoying what I'm doing here. So thank you guys again very much for listening, and I will see you next week between Awesome and Disaster. Take care, everybody.